Hi everyone, my name's Tom Langan, and this is Something Good, the bite-sized podcast about anything and everything good, for goodness sake. This is episode 1, the introduction. So the first thing I wanted to do in starting this podcast is explain why I'm starting it and what it's going to be. Really just want to give you guys an idea of what to expect as you listen to each episode. So the reason why I'm doing this podcast is very simple. I've wanted to do a podcast for a long time, and I listened to, over the last several years, my girlfriend Becky and I have become very big fans of a show on NBC called The Good Place, which just ended. They just had their season or series finale at the end of season 4. We became really big fans of the show for a bunch of reasons. It was incredibly well acted. It was beautifully shot, which is kind of where I came into it. Really appreciating the way it was shot and the way it was written. It was a really well written, very smartly written show. So my girlfriend Becky discovered a podcast about the show called The Good Place, the podcast, hosted by Mark Evan Jackson. One of the actors from the show, he played Sean, a demon, the head demon, I guess, on the show. And it was a really interesting podcast. They did a lot of really cool things with the podcast, a lot of great interviews, great insights, great behind the scenes information about how and why they shot the show the way they shot the show. The thing that they did at the end of every episode, though, and I think it was Mark Evan Jackson's thing, is he would ask every guest, and the guests were always people who were involved with or worked on or contributed to The Good Place, the show. He would ask them first, at the end in a segment, he would ask them what's good. So he would ask them to just share something that they felt was good or was good in their lives or they thought was good in the world, which I thought was pretty cool. And then at the end of every episode, he would urge the audience to go out and do something good. And that really just kind of resonated with me for a bunch of reasons. From an early age, I've always wanted to have a positive impact on the world around me. I've been involved in the volunteer fire service since I was 16 years old. I grew up around it because of my father, who's been a volunteer fireman for over 40 years. And so I've always had this desire, this need, this urge to create something good, to have a positive impact on the world around me. So that's one reason that I focused in this direction for this kind of podcast. The other reason that I focused, and I'm just going to check my notes because I don't have a steel trap of a memory, is that I wanted to create something. I've wanted to create a podcast for a while, but I've kind of bigger than that. I've wanted to create something for me. My background is as a director of photography and producer. I've worked in television and commercial production for almost 20 years at this point. And so my whole career has been built around creating content for other people, but never really for myself because I don't pay me. And so yeah, it's always been in the back of my mind, something I wanted to do, but something that never quite happened. And I figured now is as good a time as any to actually do something for myself that I think is good for me to do. That I think is a good piece of content to put out. And so this podcast, which is going to come in a few different forms, it's going to come in the form of an audio podcast. It's going to come in the form of a video that will be uploaded to YouTube with each episode. There will be other pieces of content that come out of each episode, I'm sure. So it's going to be kind of a multimedia sort of thing. But really, it's for me. It's because I wanted to create something for myself, a piece of content that is my own, that is good, that puts something positive out in the world. Hence the title, keeping it simple, something good. So that's the why. Next is the what. Well, first of all, it's going to be short form because I really like Mike Rowe's podcast the way I heard it. Each episode is very short. His stories are short. He keeps them concise on purpose. And I really like it. I appreciate it. They're great podcasts to jump into and to listen to something, to learn something, to hear an interesting take on a story. And I really enjoy that. So I want to keep it short. I want to keep it sweet. I don't envision this being an interview podcast necessarily, although I hope that the podcast will garner enough attention that eventually I'll end up having guests and things like that. But to start out with, I'm sure it'll evolve over time, but to start out with, the podcast is going to be designed to be short, concise, and it's literally just going to be me shining a light on something that I think is good, something that I've experienced, I've heard, I've seen, I've read about, whatever, something that's come to my attention that I think is good and I think deserves having whatever amount of light I have shown on it. I'm also going to do these episodes, quote unquote, live to tape. And what that means is I'm not going to edit the episodes. It's a hard thing for me, having kind of come up in the world of television and commercial production. Everything is edited. So it's really hard for me, or almost everything I've ever worked on has been edited. So it's really hard for me and my sensibility to not edit something, but I don't want to get mired down in the sort of quest for perfection that's unattainable. And so the way for me to short circuit that part of my brain and to keep me off of that dangerous path is to simply do it sort of live to tape, with no cuts, with no edits, with no do-overs, with no backsies. It is what it is. And hopefully it'll get better over time. Again, this is just the introduction, but that's the way I plan to do every episode, is literally live to tape with no interruptions. And really all I want it to do is live up to its name. Each episode is going to be me sharing something good, something that I think is good, shining a light on it. It is literally going to be what that thing is and why I think it's good, why I think it's worthy of being shared with you. And that's it. I hope for these episodes to be, under 10 minutes each. I don't want to take up too much of your day droning on. I don't want to be another, uselessly long podcast. I'm not going to name names, but I've definitely listened to a few that don't need to be as long as they are. I just want to take a few minutes of your day to share something good with you. And hopefully you'll pass that on. Hopefully you will then share something good with the people in your lives. And the cycle continues, I guess. Without waxing too poetic, I really just want to put something out into the world that is good. So I listened today to the last episode of The Good Place, the podcast, where Mark Evan Jackson and Mike Schur were kind of wrapping up the series, talking about how they shot the finale, how they made the decisions they made from a story perspective, from a shot perspective, creatively. And I really enjoyed it. And it made me think, that was the last time, and Mark Evan Jackson even said in that podcast, it was the last time that he was going to urge the audience, the listeners, to go out and do something good. And so I thought today was the perfect day to do something good myself and start this podcast. So welcome. I hope you enjoy the ride. Please share, like, subscribe to the podcast. There will be more episodes coming soon. Once again, I'm Tom Langen. This is Something Good, a bite-sized podcast about anything and everything good, for goodness sake.